The morning sunlight hit just right on the fresh layer of snow covering my driveway when I heard the familiar crunch of boots on gravel. I looked up from my snowblower and saw her Angela Pickens, the HOA treasurer, clipboard clutched in her claw-like hand, lips pursed so tight they looked stapled shut. "Quinton Jameson," she called out like a schoolteacher catching a kid chewing gum. "You're in violation." Again, I killed the engine and pulled down my ear protection. "Violation of what, Angela? Clearing my own driveway?" She flipped through her papers with fake purpose. "The HOA hired a contracted snow removal service for the winter. All homeowners are required to pay their share. $92 this month, due by Monday." I stared at her, still gripping the handle of my snowblower. "I plow my own driveway with my own machine. Every storm, haven't missed one. Why would I pay for a service I don't use?" She blinked at me like I had just spoken Martian. "That's not how this works, Quinton. This is a community service. It's in the HOA winter maintenance addendum." I raised an eyebrow. "That addendum that got voted down last fall," Angela's lips twitched. She didn't like being reminded of that meeting, especially since I recorded it. I had stood up and read the bylaws out loud, exposed the sneaky clause she'd tried slipping in last minute, and the entire block voted it down. Unanimously. I leaned on the snowblower. "You're not seriously trying to resurrect that nonsense, are you?" Her nostrils flared. "You're being uncooperative and hostile." "Hostile," I laughed. "Angela, I clear my own snow. I even helped Mrs. Conway across the street last week when your contractor didn't show up." "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "If you don't pay, we'll be issuing a lien against your property." Now that got my attention. "You're threatening legal action over snow I didn't ask to be moved, that was never moved, on a driveway I've maintained myself for 10 years. She gave a smug little nod and turned to leave. "You've been warned." I watched her disappear down the sidewalk, leaving high heel prints in the snow she claimed someone else had removed. That's when I decided I was done messing around. Angela had crossed a line, and this time I was going to make sure she didn't get away with it. I spent the rest of that morning inside, gloves still damp from the snow, pacing across the hardwood floor with a legal pad in one hand and my old city planning binder in the other. I'd worked community enforcement for 12 years before retiring early burnout, mostly, but I'd kept every regulation book, every template, every contact. Angela must have forgotten that. I wasn't dealing with a neighbor dispute anymore, threatening a lien without legal basis. That wasn't just petty, it was fraudulent. If she was issuing these threats to me, she was likely doing it to others. And if she'd falsified any documents to push it through, that was criminal. I opened my laptop and pulled up the county clerk's property database. It took only a few minutes to confirm, no new filings against my parcel, no lien. But Angela had sounded sure, too sure. I called my friend Harvey, still a code enforcement officer in the neighboring township. "Quinton," he answered. "You don't usually call unless someone's buried a shed without a permit." "Worse," I said. "Ever hear of an HOA threatening liens over unapproved snow removal fees?" he whistled. "That's bold, completely illegal unless it was in the covenants and properly ratified." "It wasn't," I said. "And she's calling it an addendum. But we killed it at the vote last October. You recording these threats, of course." He paused. "Then you've got leverage. That's a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum. Depending on what she files, it could be mail fraud if she uses the postal system." I scribbled a note. "You think the sheriff's department would take this seriously? If she files a false lien, absolutely. That's a felony." I thanked him and hung up, the next steps already forming in my head. But before I could dive into paperwork, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Aaron McClellan, the guy 3 houses down. Young, works swing shifts at the hospital, always polite. He looked nervous. "Hey, Quinton, I don't want to bother you, but..." "Did Angela talk to you about the snow thing?" I motioned him inside. "Yeah, you too," he stepped in, still in his scrubs, shaking his head. "She left an envelope taped to my garage, says I owe $110 for emergency snow clearance, but I was home that day. No one came." I shoveled my own driveway during a break between calls. I handed him a copy of the HOA's bylaws already bookmarked. That's not just unethical, it's fraudulent. Sit down. We're going to fix this. Within an hour, I had 5 more neighbors in my living room, each with stories eerily similar. Envelopes, notices, threats. One woman, a retired schoolteacher named Marcia, had already mailed a check because the letter claimed unpaid dues would affect her credit score. I nearly tore the paper in half when I saw the wording. Angela was fabricating authority. Worse, she was using fear to collect money under false pretenses. I called the county recorder's office next. "Are there any liens pending on parcel 2408-193? The voice on the other end typed for a moment. "No, sir." "Not as of today." "Is it possible for an HOA to file one without owner consent? Only if the HOA covenants specifically authorize it and only after due process. Typically must go through small claims court first." I thanked her and hung up. Angela hadn't filed anything yet. But I couldn't assume she wouldn't. I needed to get ahead of her. I pulled up the HOA's Articles of Incorporation and cross-referenced the state's nonprofit governance laws. Sure enough, there was a clause requiring board vote and majority homeowner approval for any new fee structure. No such vote had occurred. Then something caught my eye. The HOA's treasurer, Angela Pickens, had listed her personal address as the business headquarters of the HOA in the last annual filing. That was highly irregular. I printed the page and added it to the growing folder on my dining table. That afternoon, I drove to the township's building department. I knew the clerk, Lydia, from back when I sat in on zoning meetings. "Quinton," she said, surprised. "What brings you in?" "I need copies of all permits and contracts issued to the HOA this winter." She frowned as she typed into her terminal. "There's only one. Snow Logistics, LLC, contract filed January 3rd, no competitive bid documentation. No proof of service logs. Can I get a copy?" She printed it out. "That's strange," she murmured, flipping the pages. "The treasurer signed on behalf of the HOA, but the contract amount is $28,000. I stared at it. "For 3 months of snow removal," she nodded. "And no signatures from the board president or secretary. That's against state HOA regulation." I left the office with the papers in hand and my pulse pounding. $28,000. That was enough to plow every street in the township, let alone our 32-home subdivision. Angela had signed a contract without authorization, bypassed the board, and now she was trying to backfill the cost by shaking down homeowners. That wasn't just unethical. That was embezzlement. I made a call to the sheriff's department next. The deputy who answered listened carefully as I walked through everything. The unauthorized contract, the fabricated charges, the threats of liens, the frightened neighbors. "Mr. Jameson," he said slowly, "this sounds like it needs to go to our financial crimes unit." "Do you have documentation?" "I have everything, and I can get witness statements." "We'll need you to come in. Bring it all." I spent the evening collecting affidavits. 14 neighbors signed statements detailing the charges they'd received and confirming their driveways had not been serviced. 2 had bank statements showing cashed checks made out to the HOA's general fund. Aaron provided photos of his untouched driveway from the supposed service day, complete with time-stamped security footage showing no plow ever arrived. I printed everything, labeled every folder. Then I packed it all into a plastic bin and drove it to the sheriff's office the next morning. Detective Clara Rendell met me in a conference room, her expression unreadable as I laid out the evidence. "This is thorough," she said after an hour of reviewing the materials. "If even half of this checks out, we're looking at criminal fraud and possible misappropriation of funds." "I have the HOA financial reports from last year too," I said, sliding another folder across the table. "There's a discrepancy in December's ledger. A $6,000 withdrawal labeled operational buffer." She nodded slowly. "We'll subpoena the HOA's account records. If she moved funds, we'll find it." I walked out feeling like I'd lit a fuse. All that remained was to see how big the explosion would be. By Wednesday morning, word had spread. I'd hardly poured my coffee before my phone buzzed with updates from neighbors. Angela had gone silent. Her usual weekday patrol clipboard in hand, inspecting mailbox paint and grass lengths hadn't happened. That alone raised eyebrows. Then came the email. A hastily written clarification from the HOA board claiming that the snow removal fees were part of a pilot program and subject to voluntary participation. Voluntary, my ass. The email didn't address the threat of liens, didn't explain the $28,000 contract, and definitely didn't mention the forged signatures. The tone had shifted from smug to nervous. I forwarded the email directly to Detective Rendell, who had asked me to report anything new. She replied that afternoon, asking if I could come in again this time to speak with someone from the district attorney's office. I didn't need to be asked twice. At the station, I was ushered into a small conference room where Rendell introduced me to Assistant DA Colin Rourke. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his eyes lit up when he saw the folders I brought. "She's trying to spin this as a clerical misunderstanding," he said, flipping through the contract copy. "But if she submitted this to the HOA's bank to initiate payment, that's fraud. If she did it using unauthorized board authority, that's false representation. And if funds were redirected, we're looking at possible wire fraud." Rendell added, "We've already subpoenaed the HOA's financial institution. And we located the business license for Snow Logistics, LLC." I leaned forward. "Let me guess it's a shell. More like a sock puppet," Rourke said. "LLC is registered to a man named Darryl Pickens, Angela's husband. That business didn't exist until 6 weeks ago," Rendell continued. "No equipment, no employees, no service logs, just a P.O. box and a personal checking account." I shook my head once. "She tried to create a fake contractor, write a bloated contract, then force residents to foot the bill all under the radar." Rourke closed the folder. "We'll file charges once we confirm the money changed hands. Some of your neighbors' checks were deposited into the HOA account, not directly into that LLC, so we're investigating both routes." "She's going to try to bury this," I warned. "She's already panicking." "Then we need to move faster," Rendell said. "We're preparing a search warrant for her residence and her home office. If there are financial records there, we'll find them." The next morning, 2 unmarked cars showed up at Angela's house. I didn't witness the whole thing, but Erin texted me a photo from the end of the cul-de-sac, 2 officers walking out with boxes of documents and her laptop. She didn't come out to watch. Maybe she was too busy scrambling for a lawyer. That night, I walked over to Mrs. Conway's place. She was in her 80s, partially blind, and had been one of the few who'd paid the fee without question. I helped her draft a notarized statement and offered to drive her to the sheriff's office the following day. She clasped my hand and said, "Bless you, Quinton." I was too scared to ask questions. I thought they'd take my house. That stuck with me long after I left. By Friday, Rendell called again. "We confirmed transfers from the HOA account to the Snow Logistics account, 6 of them, totaling just under $27,000. All funneled within 10 days of contract signing." "Where did the money come from?" I asked. "Some from the general fund, but a lot came from individual checks. Angela deposited them directly and moved them out within 48 hours. I exhaled slowly. "That's deliberate." "She knew exactly what she was doing. We're issuing a formal charge sheet. She'll be arrested next week." But I wasn't done. The HOA still had 2 other board members, President Carl Dent and Secretary Susan Walters, who had stayed suspiciously quiet through all of this. I had a hunch they'd either been kept in the dark or were complicit. It was time to find out which. I set up a town hall meeting through the neighborhood's group chat and printed flyers for those less tech-savvy. We booked the library's community room and lined up chairs. I brought copies of the contract, the bylaws, and the state HOA statutes. I even had a projector. When Carl and Susan walked in, the entire room went still. Carl cleared his throat and started with, "We understand there's been some confusion." "No," I interrupted. "There's been fraud. And we want to know what you knew and when." Susan looked visibly shaken. She glanced at Carl, then sat down without speaking. Carl tried to maintain composure. "We were told the snow contract was approved during the winter prep meeting." "Which meeting?" I asked. "The one in October where we rejected it, or the non-existent one Angela claimed happened in December." He hesitated. "We didn't see the final version of the contract. Angela said she'd handle it. Did you sign anything?" "No." I stepped forward with the projector remote. "This is the signature page. It contains only Angela's name, no board approval, no competitive bids, and this," I clicked again, showing the LLC registration, "is the contractor, her husband." Gasps rippled through the room. Susan finally spoke. "I didn't know any of this. I thought it was a standard vendor. She never told us she'd bypassed protocol." "Then why didn't you ask questions?" Someone shouted from the back. Carl rubbed his face. "We trusted her. She's been treasurer for 6 years." "Then either you were complicit," I said, "or you were negligent. And either way, the community deserves new leadership." By the end of the night, a motion had formed, one that the bylaws allowed, a vote of no confidence. We scheduled the special election for the following weekend. The petition received 25 signatures in 48 hours. Enough to trigger a removal. On Monday morning, Angela Pickens was arrested for wire fraud, financial misappropriation, and falsification of documents. The local news picked it up by noon. She was led out of her home in handcuffs. The HOA's accounts were frozen pending investigation. Her husband's LLC was dissolved by the state 3 days later. The fallout was swift. Carl and Susan resigned before the vote even happened. An interim board formed, and I was asked to oversee the election since I had refused to run. I declined the offer to join the board permanently, but I helped draft a new transparency charter and introduced a clause requiring third-party audits annually. The driveway I'd plowed myself never saw another fake invoice. No more threats. No more clipboards on my front lawn. But the best moment came 2 weeks later when a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. It detailed the charges Angela would face, including potential restitution to every homeowner she had defrauded. Inside the envelope was a note from Ader Rourke. "Your documentation made this possible. The community owes you." I pinned it to the bulletin board in my garage, right above my snowblower. It was the night before the special election when I noticed the motion sensor light flicker on in my backyard. I stepped outside, heart thudding. Nothing moved, just the wind brushing through the pine trees lining my fence. Still, I checked the security feed, and there it was, a shadow slipping along the back gate just minutes before the light came on. I zoomed in. Someone had tried to cover the lens with a gloved hand, but not before the camera caught the shape of a clipboard and a flash of red nail polish. Angela. Despite being out on bail, she'd come back. I forwarded the footage to Detective Rendell immediately. She called within the hour. "She's not supposed to contact any complainants," she said. "That's a violation of her release terms." "Good catch. We'll report it to the judge." By morning, the prosecutor had filed a motion to revoke Angela's bail. She was picked up again quietly this time, no spectacle, and returned to county lockup until her hearing. The judge wasn't amused. Meanwhile, the neighborhood gathered at the community center for the emergency vote. The room buzzed with a strange energy, part relief, part disbelief that so much could happen in such a short time. Folding chairs scraped the tile as residents took their seats under the yellowed ceiling tiles. The place smelled like old coffee and pine-scented floor cleaner. Aaron stood at the front, holding the sealed ballot box. He addressed the group like he was presenting a medical case. "Every homeowner gets one vote. All ballots are anonymous. Place them in the box and we'll count them at the end of the session." I'd helped write the ballot. We weren't just selecting new board members, we were voting on a complete revision of the HOA's structure. Oversight clauses, mandatory audits, term limits, and resident veto power on any expenditure over $1,000. Carl and Susan sat quietly in the back, not making eye contact with anyone. They hadn't spoken publicly since resigning. Neither of them cast a vote. Once the final ballot dropped into the box, Aaron locked it and walked it to the front table. Two neighbors, one a retired IRS auditor, the other a notary, supervised the count. When they read the results, the room broke into spontaneous applause. The new board was in. 3 homeowners who had never served before, each with no connection to Angela or her allies. I declined the nomination again, but agreed to serve in an advisory role on a temporary basis, mostly to make sure the transition happened cleanly. The first act of the new board was to call an open audit of the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. They hired an independent firm from outside the county, one with no prior ties to the neighborhood. The firm set up a temporary office in the old clubhouse and began sifting through receipts, bank records, and financial statements. Within 2 weeks, they found something none of us had expected. A second account. It had been opened under the HOA's name, but with a different mailing address, Angela's P.O. box. It wasn't listed in any of the annual reports. Over the past 18 months, more than $90,000 had moved through it. Not just snow fees, everything from storm drain maintenance to security assessments that had never been approved or performed. The forensic accountant who briefed the new board looked stunned. She was essentially running 2 HOAs, he said. One you knew about, and one that existed only to funnel money. The board turned those findings over to the district attorney. That brought a whole new round of charges: money laundering, financial abuse of a nonprofit, and falsifying public records. The DA's office petitioned the judge to freeze Angela's personal assets. Her husband filed for divorce within a week, but the most damning piece of evidence came not from the audit, but from a flash drive found in Angela's home office during the search warrant execution. It contained scanned copies of modified invoices, blank templates with fillable amounts, and an Excel spreadsheet labeled reallocations. Each row corresponded to a different address in the neighborhood. Next to each name was a number, amounts collected and amounts diverted. Not only had she fabricated charges, she had tracked exactly how much she took from each of us. The DA's office called me in to testify during the grand jury proceedings. I sat under the fluorescent lights of the courthouse conference room, wearing the same jacket I'd worn the morning she tried to find me, and explained under oath how I'd uncovered the scam. I showed the original bylaws, the audio of the vote, the contractor registration, the surveillance clip from my backyard. The jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes. She was indicted on 15 counts. The trial date was set for early spring. Angela's attorney tried to broker a plea deal, offering restitution in exchange for reduced charges, but the DA refused. Too many people had been affected. Too much had been stolen. The judge agreed. At trial, the prosecution laid it all out: the fake snow removal company, the forged contracts, the dual bank accounts. They even brought in Mrs. Conway, who testified tearfully about being frightened into paying what she thought was a legal obligation. Angela took the stand once. Her voice was flat, mechanical. She claimed she'd never intended to harm anyone and that the second account was a contingency fund. But the jury didn't buy it, not when confronted with her spreadsheet, not when shown the deposit slips in her handwriting. She was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 9 years. The judge ordered restitution in full, plus a 10-year ban from holding any fiduciary role in any nonprofit organization. Her home was seized to cover the payments. The HOA received the first check, just over $18,000, 4 weeks after sentencing. It was distributed back to homeowners proportionally. The new board used the remaining funds to repair the crumbling community playground and install real snow poles along the roadways, something we'd been requesting for years. I stepped down from my advisory role after the first quarter. The systems were in place. The audits were rolling. The annual meeting had record attendance. People who'd never spoken at a board meeting before were stepping forward, organizing cleanups, planting flowers around the sign at the entrance. One crisp morning in April, I stood at the edge of my driveway, watching the last of the snow melt off the grass. Aaron walked by with his coffee, nodded, and said, "Can't believe how different it feels now." I looked up at the sky, clear, bright, no hint of clouds. "Funny what happens," I said, "when people stop being afraid to ask questions." He chuckled. "Still got that snowblower, always," I said, "but I don't think I'll be needing it for a while." And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to us again.